We're live, Madam Chair.
Okay, welcome, folks. This is House Corrections and Institutions Committee. It is Wednesday, May 28th. It's almost 12 o'clock. We are looking at the Senate proposal amendment on our H50, which deals with identifying underutilized state buildings and land to do an inventory. And they changed the language a little bit, added language on line 12, which they added or state leased buildings. They capitalized state. So my question has been, does this mean buildings that are state owned that we lease out? Or does it mean that we are paying rent? We have state activity in buildings that are not state owned and we have a lease with the owner of that building. I just want clarity on this so everyone's on the same page. Understand this. And they also changed language. I get the right graph on page 2. And it is line 16, line 6, 16. It's on line 16 on the amendment.
Line 4
on the draft.
Well, on Senate proposal amendment, it's line 4. Any land is necessary.
6. And it states that unnecessary for statutory purposes of the agency where we had unnecessary for state purposes. So let's start with the first part, which deals with state leased buildings. So Ben has filled in to give us some legal thoughts.
We'll see. Ben Novogroski for the Office of Legislative Counsel, filling in for John Gray, hopefully ably. So section 1, as Madam Chair just briefly went over, had a couple of changes. Now the Commissioner of BGS shall maintain an inventory of all state-owned or state-leased buildings and land. To be quite honest, it's not very clear what it means. But reading it contextually on its face, you have state-owned buildings, and for buildings to be leased by the state, they would have to be state-owned. So by adding an additional phrase here or term, it implies that there's a difference. Therefore, one could interpret it as buildings that the state leases from another owner. However, on its face, it's not the clearest it could be. Now, I would defer to my colleagues at BGS about how they interpret this language, since they're the ones that are going to be implementing it. But you have to read it contextually to understand the distinction, but it's not as clear as it could be. If the committee's intent is to inventory state buildings that the state leases, this should probably be clarified, or the other way around, if you want to inventory buildings that the state leases from others.
Troy?
I'm also thinking of National Life where we don't lease the entire building, but we lease a portion of it.
And there's a potential that also captures, so maybe there is a third distinction, where it's buildings that the state owns and leases, but maybe not in their entirety. But again, it's not as clear as it could be.
That's been my question for 2.5 years. Because when I saw this, it was like, well, is the intent that we are paying leases, that we're looking at lease space with the state leases with private developers, or is it our own buildings that we lease out? I think we just need clarity. So even the way it's drafted, it's unclear.
I mean, and again, you have to read it contextually on its face, the plain language, which implies a difference between state-owned and state-leased.
Because if it's a state-owned building and we're leasing it, it would be captured under the language of state-owned buildings.
Potentially, but I do need to emphasize that it indicates a difference or a distinction, but it's unclear exactly what that distinction is.
Kevin?
So once we figure this out, are we gonna add a section that calls definitions?
You could do that, or you could just elaborate on line 10 exactly what you mean.
Right.
You could just say, or buildings in which the state is the lessor or the lessee. Or buildings where the state owns it, but they are not fully leased. You can,
Either way, gotcha.
any combination or,
Yep.
So if I can also add with the conversation I had with the chair of Senate institutions yesterday, and Sean, correct me, because Sean was here as well. She was thinking that if we have a lease out there with a private developer, we're paying a lease. And we have empty we don't have many people in that space, that maybe we could sublet. And I'm kind of like, I don't know if that's a possibility.
A, it depends on the terms of the commercial lease. B, if the terms were to allow for subleasing, which is rare in commercial context, you would still typically need permission of the owner of the building to do that.
I didn't share those thoughts with her, but that's what went through my mind. It's because we're not the owner.
No.
It depends what the lease says, and it depends when you can break the lease, when you can walk away, when your lease is completed. In terms of costs. So should we stay put, Ben? I think this is probably a good shift. The Commissioner of BGS, if you're willing to sit where you are, introduce yourself for the record and kind of weigh in. I know we've been looking at this yesterday as a committee. Today was the first time we've had legal counsel weigh in. So welcome, Commissioner, if you could identify yourself for the record.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Wanda Manoli, Commissioner of Buildings and General Services. So I'm going to speak to line 10 in the version, in the Senate version. And I testified on page 50 in the Senate as it had passed the House. The question was asked if I had a problem with including state leased buildings. And if you go to section G of the statute, you will see that this is, so first of all, I just want to say, all of this language is about the space book. And everything connects to the space book, which I'm required to collect the inventory as commissioner of all of our property. And the space book is used to manage our inventory under the jurisdiction of the commissioner of BGS. And it's also used and done every July of each year and updated because we use it to establish fee for space, which is what we charge on our state-owned property, what our rent is. So I think it's really important that why is this language here and how do we use it before we start redefining it for other purposes? And I would ask that the members take that into consideration. In the section G, maybe I have the, no, section G, it's not in here. So section G, Title 29, 165, section G states that the space book is compiled annually and contains information on lands, tower leases, and buildings owned and leased by BGS. And it breaks down state owned and leased space by town and by agency. So that, and maybe that's a bullet in my presentation, but I'm pretty sure it might be in section G. So when they offer to add state lease up in section E, my interpretation was business as usual. And I'm going to provide you the state I interpreted as state lease, as space that we lease, such as National Light, like that so that is what it is because we're already reporting that. And if you go to the overview that's in the cover of the space book, that I provided you there's the overview and it talks about how many buildings we own, how much is usable square foot of what we own, how much is rentable, how much is vacant, what we lease last year, 94 leases, 933,000 square feet, what our tower leases are and what our land is. And we break that down in the space book by every community, by every agency, and so the data exists. So when I agreed to state leased, I was interpreting that to be what we are currently doing, because we weren't trying to rewrite the space book. And I think it was a great point of information to this committee on all of the data and how we collect it and how we create it. So if you're going to expand, so our preference is to go with our interpretation because of how the importance of the space book, what it's used for and how we use it to manage it. When we end up with vacant space and we determine, at least from BGS, that there's no use of it, it goes to the next piece of statute, which says we have to bring it to the legislature to get approval to sell it. And it's at fair market value unless you do something else. And so I think, we've had those discussions. Also, if we were to lease our state-owned space out, there's specific statute that talks that it has to be at fair market value and it cannot be for more than 10 years. So I'm very concerned that there's lots of information that's being asked for and we're trying to get it from this report, and I don't think this is the place to get some of that information from. So that's how we interpret state lease, and I could talk about other changes when we get there, unless you want me to go through all of my comments,
Well,
Madam Chair.
I think we're all in agreement that we should look at lease space that the state is paying a lease for.
And we do collect that data.
It's just the uncertainty of how that term state leased buildings and state is capitalized, which could be interpreted, you're paying a lease or you're leasing out a state-owned building. But, I mean, it's unclear.
And I think the other piece is, this authority is for the direction of property that's under my jurisdiction as commissioner. And what the AOT has different land and building requirements, A&R does. This is not the avenue for you all to collect some of that. I mean, we're doing the general, AOT has this much land and this is their building. But if you want to get into more detail about what those are, I think you have to be looking at them separately and not hoping to get it through this mechanism. So for example, if A&R has property in their inventory that they're leasing out, they own it and they're leasing it out. I don't know the statutory requirements on that, what their lease conditions can be, because those don't go through me. Could go through executive order, could go through legislative action, or could be in their general authority. So that's why we've always interpreted state lease space that the Commissioner of Buildings and General Services takes action on.
James?
Well, I was just gonna just double check, maybe triple check that I understand what your interpretation is, which is that when it says state owned or state leased, it is talking about buildings that we lease from others. That's your interpretation. And you feel fairly confident.
And that's what we've been providing you under
Yeah, I get that.
statute for 30 years.
Yeah, I just want to make sure that was, I thought, I'm sure that's what I heard.
That's
I want to be, because it's the most important issue that we're dealing with right there, that I want to make sure it's very clear that was your interpretation.
So if you're not commissioned, no commissioner comes on and reads this language, do you think it's clear to the new person?
Well, I think, Madam Chair, the process in place in how we collect and do this, I think we've presented to you. We start with the insurance data and then we go through the section. So we have a very clear methodology, again, in creating this book, which I think all of you notice how much information we have there. I believe a new commissioner would be presented this and says that it aligns with the interpretation and the statute. To be honest with you, we have a team in property management that puts this together. We do this every July. We do it once a year and we do it July, which goes to some other language that is in there because that base is collecting the data, then feeds to how we assign fee for space and who's in that space, because that's part of the budget process. So it's used for our inventory. It's used to manage our inventory. It's at place and time. So we present as of July 1, we have X amount vacant space. In January, that number could have changed. I'm just using that as an example. So I would say that the commissioner of a new commissioner, future commissioner would align, with the process that is there. I understand your concern. When I agreed to adding the state lease in the Senate, I was interpreting that to be what we already do. I did not go into the deeper thought, honestly, that you and this committee have.
Did you see this language before they voted?
I saw just I saw the state lease and I agreed to it because my interpretation, which is what you had mentioned earlier, Beth, my interpretation of that is our current state-owned and leased land as we provide now.
Kevin?
As written, does this language call for any additional information that's already in Spacebook?
Not the way that I have interpreted it.
That's what I thought. So my question is if there are other properties, we can define that as state-owned, state leased, whatever, land, that we're not collecting with this bill, is this effective or should we be doing something else? Because aren't we wanting to know all the properties that might be usable or should be?
So in the space
Is
book,
that your intent?
in the space book, we are providing you all of the inventory information that is under the control of Buildings and
I
General
understand.
Services.
Right.
And we're now adding, as it is amended, that we are going to, because we used to collect sections on land owned by AOT and A&R.
Oh.
We stopped doing that. You asked that we include that, and we said we would work on it and do it, but it's a summary to follow the same form and function as a space book. It's not for us to make an interpretation on the use or what that land is. You are going to have to speak with them directly.
So BGS is maintaining an inventory of all state-owned buildings that could be under AOT, could be under A&R, could be under BGS. And all buildings that we lease. So that could go beyond BGS, that could be AOT.
We provide you the data of the buildings that BGS legally leases for use of others. So their leases under my control.
But not, so is that different than all state-owned buildings? Because all state-owned buildings, Commissioner BGS shall maintain an inventory of all state-owned buildings. So those are buildings that are owned by other agencies and departments as well as BGS.
So we are providing you detail on the buildings that are state-owned under the jurisdiction of, including rest areas that are maintained by DGS. We have not been providing you inventory. I mean, let's go to Forest Parks and Recreation. Can we just, so everyone's on the same page, you're just gonna give me a second. So I don't know if you all, I know some of you took paper copies and of course the pages are not marked. So there's a section called owned by agency.
Mhm.
And then when you go there, it lists, for example, BGS. BGS, hold on. To get to an A and R, so these are all, and it says owned by agencies, which I think could be, it really should be assigned by agencies. Because what is not in here, well, if we go, it's not marked, but it has A and R, Agency of Natural Resources. And it's got,
Okay, you're in the space for.
I'm in the space, yeah. So what I'm saying is this is the inventory that we do, but if you look at the content, for example, this is not showing all of the under A and R, it's not showing all of the public parks. It's showing the building.
Does it show what FPR leases from National Life?
That is under
that's under the lease.
BGS, under leases,
Okay.
because we lease it on
Gotcha.
their
Okay.
behalf.
Different section.
So to answer your question, this again, the statute was created for the statute says the Commissioner of Buildings and General Services is responsible for all property transaction leases on state-owned buildings. So that's what it reflects to. We used to collect a section for AOT and A&R that was a subset of the space book for information only that listed all of their properties. Because they maintain and manage those, BGS doesn't. And so what we agreed to in this change when we were talking about it is that we would bring that back in, and I believe that's in section G,
Mhm.
books. Section G, no, that's from the Senate, not that one, up or down. But right there, so what this says is the head of each agency shall prepare and forward to the commissioner. Prepare and forward to the commissioner annually in a format prescribed. This is really for their inventory that I don't collect.
Mhm.
And I was going to collect it as a subsection in the space book.
Mhm.
And Madam Chair, if there's something
Turned into
specific
something
that
more complicated. Thank you, Connor.
yeah,
I actually like. I don't know if it is as complicated as we're making it here. I think it's not going to solve the problems that some of us want it to. Like, I believe, like, if we go up to National Life, and Wanda does an analysis of the occupancy, and, Wanda's only looking at like how many people work there, but it's not going to show you that there are empty desks. It's going to show you that it's full occupancy, right? Because all those desks there are occupied at some point by somebody, right?
So what I asked this committee when we started talking about that, I said that I'm new and I'm doing a utilization analysis. And that I need to do a utilization. There's many factors that are coming into this. We're looking at rebuilding Montpelier. What does that look like? What does FEMA give us? And how do we assign people? What's the impact on the buildings and utilization of Waterbury? And the Secretary of Administration and the governor has said, do that. I am in the process of doing a utilization analysis. How does that feed into telework? What should we be planning for? Do we build? We used to build, if you had 100 FTEs, we gave you space for 120 FTEs. That has shifted. And so we are doing this process. And so I said, you don't need to direct me to do the utilization analysis because we're already doing it because that's part of my responsibility. So I'm well aware of the utilization currently at National Life, at Waterbury, in Montpelier. But how there are many spokes that go into that wheel, right? You have a utilization today, everybody's different, but what do we need to build for? What should our occupancy be with teleworking? Should it be 70% of your FTEs? Should it be 60%? We are working on that right now, and I've said, please let me continue doing that work where, and then I have to look at every lease. I have to look at what's the out clause? What does that mean? How can you shift? How do we utilize our space differently? And what is the future of it? And so that is occurring, especially before we start maybe building or doing build to suites for programs that can fit into existing space. And I'm really passionate about it because I do understand what the committees are seeing and what they're trying to evaluate, but I need to do that work to give you good information to see if we need to change anything. And that's what we're doing.
So, and I'm going to agree with you. You look like I'm going to disagree with.
No,
I'm going to agree with.
if you're going down the road, I'm going down.
No, I don't know about that either. It's like the intent as passed out of this committee, I think. This language does meet that. And for me, the big trigger, right, is coming in with the report, the space book. It's a problem that, I served on this committee 2 years and I didn't know the space book existed prior to this, right? So by bringing that space book in, and I think we did have a conversation, maybe the format could be a little easier to show the vacant space and everything. It can be a little dense to read through it, but to have that conversation with the commissioner at the beginning of each biennium, this is the unoccupied space, land, what are the highlights on it? That's what's going to generate creative ideas about what do we do with that vacant space here. So I'm not as worried about this, even though I agree the language is unclear. I think it serves the purpose, gets the conversation going.
I agree with you, Colin.
And I appreciate that. And I think that's where we ended up because we do it in July. It could look different in January. You may see me in January presenting land for sale or building for sales. And part of it is because of what the space book tells us and what's occurred from the time you leave until the time you come back. And utilization.
So I'm going to throw something on the table here because we're further into the session. There's more understanding of moving pieces. Is this premature based on you doing a utilization process right now? Is this bill premature?
So I'm already doing utilization. I don't need the modification to the space book to direct me as commissioner in managing the property to do a utilization analysis. I don't need legislative language for that. In my oversight of building and lands, it's one thing that I've seen that needs to occur, and it is occurring. It is occurring, and we are going to be really probably, I would say, mid-July, really focused on this. And this is a directive from my secretary, because we are aware of how do we align new policy with space allocation? And that's my job, and that's what I'm working on. What does it look like? I'm aware that you saw space vacant in some of your tours. I'm aware of those vacancies because I've already looked at it. And how do we align? What does that mean? What is in the best interest of the state with that lease? What is the best interest of the state? What does the future look like? We have the and you can see that in multiple different things. So to answer your question, Madam Chair, I don't need this language or even the modification that you presented to do the utilization. What I am telling you is the Secretary of Administration, Buildings and General Services is doing that. This is language that collects data. I think to Representative Casey's point, presenting a summary of that data at the beginning of the year at a point in time is a great tool for you to be aware of. It should align with any property transactions that we bring to the committee.
So where are we as a committee here, folks?
Personally, I concur with the Senate.
Me too.
Yeah, it would. you know, and it gives one a little bit more weight going to the agencies saying like, look, annually, I'm directed to get this from you, right?
I don't agree with the sentence language, just for the record.
Okay.
And we haven't talked about all, if this I'm fine with. The additional language,
The
don't agree
additional
with.
language on what piece is that, section G?
So when you go to, so section G.
Unnecessary for
Page
section.
2, number starting on line 2. The head of each agency shall additionally indicate in its inventory in a format prescribed by the commissioner whether any building is vacant or whether any land is
I
unnecessary.
think,
I believe that this committee of jurisdiction, I can collect the data. I believe I'm going to use Representative Casey's. I can summarize the space book. I believe it's up to this committee to have discussions with AOT and with ANR on what their inventory is and how they're going to use it. I think that this is burdensome and it's changing my jurisdiction, that I get that information and unnecessary, and that I'm now collecting unnecessary needs for another agency. I believe this committee should have the conversation. I can give you the data. I can give you the data that AOT has 1 million square feet and here are the buildings. But this is saying that I'm also going to collect information whether any land is unnecessary for statutory purposes. That's beyond my jurisdiction and I don't.
so the way we had it was unnecessary for state purposes. Was that just as problematic for you?
didn't have this was added in the Senate.
It's just the language on line 4 was added in the Senate.
Right, so the way we had left is that I would collect the inventory in a format prescribed by the commissioner. I think they amended is vacant and whether any land is unnecessary for
Yeah.
statutory.
This is what we had in the bill that we voted out.
Mhm.
The head of each agency shall additionally indicate in its inventory in a format prescribed by the commissioner whether any building is vacant and whether any land is unnecessary for state purposes.
And I apologize, I missed the unnecessary.
So that's what we had. They changed that to unnecessary for the statutory purpose of the agency. That's the only change that they made in that section.
I missed that because I'm trying to figure out how I identify, well, I guess it would just,
It would be given to you by the other agencies.
I understand that, but I'm trying to align that in the format that we put the space book in and what that means and
So have previous commissioners or future, will they follow the same thing that you're passed?
I can't speak for future commissioners. I think that's.
But I mean,
that's-
does the language though indicate?
So
that?
what was the intent here is that we're going to bring back, we used to collect the inventory from AOT and ANR. And we had a section in the space book that had AOT's inventory and it had ANR's inventory. And it identified if it was vacant or occupied. And it was as simple as that. I'm assuming the unnecessary, and I apologize, Madam Chair, I definitely didn't make that connection with unnecessary. I guess I could ask them to then highlight the ones they think are unnecessary, as simple as that. But for then to expand for statutory purposes, you're asking BGS to start now collecting information on another agency that in statute you've given authority to manage their own property and their own inventory. And I think that should come from them. So I would support, as I did before, the House version. I believe adding statutory purpose is a whole nother level of data that I'm being asked to collect. This report is done in July. Our basis of the report, we have presented this, comes from our insurance data. We download all of the data from our insurance. We don't send out a specific form and have people collect them. We download that data. We confirm from our insurance records. So we can, and then we manipulate it to a certain point.
So it seems like this has become much more complicated than what we originally thought. So we might want to reconsider where we want to go with this bill. Kevin, you had your hand
I
up.
was just gonna say, I think our intent was to have one report that shows all the properties that might be either utilized differently or sold off. And that obviously is dependent upon the statutory requirements on those buildings, which you don't have responsibility for all of them. So that data has to be collected. So if your report says it's unnecessary and it's some other agency, then we need to ask them to come in and testify why they said it's unnecessary. That doesn't necessarily require you to get that detail, but at least we have a summary that says, look at this. That's, I think, where the committee was aiming at, is one place, a simplified report that allows us to know where we should do some digging is what I think we were trying to do.
So what's before us right now is a different stage where this bill is. It went through our body, went through the Senate amended, came back. So what's before us is, do we concur with the changes that the Senate made? Do we not concur and do an amendment? We concur with further proposal of amendment. That goes back to the Senate. Senate Institutions Committee needs to weigh. It has to go through the Senate floor for a vote. They can vote it up or down. If they voted down, and then the bill comes back, or they could ask for a conference committee. We could also ask for a conference committee right now. Or we could, and this is what I said earlier, not work on this bill this year, maybe commit it back to our committee and start work on it next January.
Okay.
Because it's really sounding like it's much more complicated than what we thought.
Suggested that 15 minutes ago.
Well, I put that on the table as well at the same time.
I don't think that,
Hmm?
I don't think that we're doing, there's no reason to hurry this because the report's not due back until later.
The big report.
Yeah.
It's at the beginning of a biennial.
It could be simple changes. If it was in April, we could probably tinker. There's no real reason to tinker with 2 days left.
You can't do it
So-
at this stage.
So this,
Especially where they held on to it for 3 weeks. Didn't respond back. I think we need to go to January.
The folks,
I'll defer to the lead sponsor on
You know, like, I could go either way, I think. Obviously, this bill is very different than the bill that was introduced, which looked at converting state land into housing, right? During deliberations, I think we, collectively realized we don't have enough information to make an intelligent decision about what state land could be used for housing until we actually look at the vacant space in state government at a report that comes in. So it was a compromise position that we landed on there. Now, I don't know if we're too far apart. The question is, could we sit down with a couple of members of Senate institutions and say, okay, this is a couple quick tweaks, works for everybody, not going to be controversial. And if we can't do that, we should wait,
So, Madam Chair,
you hold off.
oh, I'm sorry.
Kevin,
But whatever we decide, I'm hearing Wanda's not comfortable with what we would be directing her to do. Am I correct?
I'm not comfortable with, I'm concerned about BGS taking on the responsibility of adding a new collection of data for this for statutory purposes for you to accomplish another goal. I'm trying to stay true to what the purpose of the Facebook is and what that intent of that book is. And I think a lot of the data that you want is there. I'm going to say to Representative Casey, didn't even know the book existed. We've been doing it for years. How we present it to you and how we the book may not change, but what you're saying is, we want a presentation at the beginning of the year that summarizes these, that's what I'm hearing. And so giving you that information and then going from there, I think starts to get to what your purpose is, right? The book serves a purpose for collection. You want data to do an analysis for your purpose. I think the book, as it exists, does that, with the exception, we have not been giving you the same summary on AAT and A&R land, and we said we'd add that. I don't need statutory authority to bring that back in. I've already told the team to do that. It's how we present it to you and what gets presented from the book. Because I'm not gonna sit down and walk you through 75 pages of inventory. You wanna see it consolidated in one place. That, and then my responsibility when you leave is looking at all of our land and bringing forth to you. I mean, I think the consistency in history shows we bring forth to this committee every piece of property we believe we should sell. And we ask your authority, and we're required to ask for it to be for sale under statute, under fair market value, and we have to go out to bid. This legislative body makes a decision if they want to give a community first offer on that. If you want us to sell it for less, that happens in this committee, so it already exists. I think having the Commissioner of Buildings and General Services bringing forth particular property in the way the statute is the right, that it's at fair market value is the right thing. So we're already presenting, you either agree with us to sell it or not, or to dispose of it in a different way.
But I think the intent of really seeing an inventory, and this is, I'm going back to the conversations we had back in January and February, was if we had the inventory of what might be available for land, what might be available for buildings, even though the administration is not requesting that we sell that, at least it's out there, and maybe folks in the building community, development community could see, oh, there's some opportunities here, possibly. And then they could reach out to the administration to see if that property or building would be able to be put up for sale.
That's it.
And
That's the goal of the inventory. That's where
That's it.
that's the conversation we had here as a committee back in January and February.
And I think the data is there. It's just presenting, having a conversation about the data. And you're still gonna make, because if we had focused, Madam Chair, just for example, on acreage, available acreage, right? And if we had spent time on that, to your point, you've gotta know, it's vacant, but can it be, there's a whole bunch of criteria behind that. So, why haven't we sold it? And I think, and Madam Chair, I'm going to say this and I appreciate it. I mean, we have, if you look at the inventory today, we have a facility in Windsor that there's 180 plus acres of land. Right, and there's been a lot of discussion over the years in this committee and direction on what we're supposed to do with it. So I think it exists. It's just now it's at a time where you want to elevate that data and have more detailed discussions.
So what's going through my mind is you're doing a utilization process right now. You'll have more information on all of that come January.
That's correct.
The inventory piece is not due until the beginning of a new legislative biennium, which brings it to 27.
In this proposed language.
Right.
But
So if we were to bring the bill back into our committee now and do further work on this come January 26, knowing that we want that inventory, that would still, and we tweaked or worked on it next session, that inventory would still be able, you would have time summer and fall to do an inventory?
well, I do it every year. So it's really we're required by statute to do this every year. I think coming back and presenting it and you align what specific items you want is what's
The
gonna make.
inventory that
is
will
going to
help
make a
us
difference.
figure out what information we really want
Mm.
in that inventory that will be given out in 2027.
I mean, we've never brought, the space book has been something that we just did as an overview. Clearly, I hear you and this committee can say, we want a presentation on the 2025 space book. And you can, pick up the phone and you can call that and we're gonna put that together and it's gonna have those specific pieces. I'm still gonna collect, even if you hold the bill, I'm still gonna go back to the old model where we had the inventory, a summary of inventory owned by other entities not under BGS.
So I'm going to make another motion that
Yeah.
we leave this to January and bring it back full force to whatever we need to do.
Agreed.
Agreed.
Honor,
Yeah, I'm okay with that. The only, my only hesitation again is people have a lot of ideas as the months go by, right? They might bring other ideas that go into this bill that we've tried to work with the other chamber a bit. So it just caveat, it could look a bit different next year, right? It's
right, but the issue is we're at almost the 12th hour. And I'm just thinking of what's happening over in the other body right now and trying to get things focused and through. It's dynamic over there. And that's what keeps going through my mind. I mean, this bill sat on a calendar for third reading for a week and a half. And then we should have had this last week at this time. So,
I mean, the way you could do it though, is that if you prioritize this as the first
right,
bill you take off the wall, it's effective on passage. If you race to get it to be the first act of twenty
Get it
twenty-six,
through.
and there's probably enough time to do that and enough time for BGS to, make any necessary adjustments to accommodate what you decide.
So Mary has a motion that we delay action on this. Basically, you're going to recommit it back to the committee and work on it next January. It's basically what your motion is. For a second for that.
Second.
Any further discussion?
I mean, the two basic options are accept the Senate's version as it is, or, right? There's no third.
Unless you want to concur with further proposal of amendment and then you get into the real
Yeah,
craziness of what's happening in this building.
two decent options, yes. Yeah.
So if the motion carries, I'm assuming the bill's gonna come back to the committee. I've got to work through leadership, through the speaker on that, but the motion would be to commit the bill to our
To us.
committee. Then we're in control of it next January,
Yeah.
basically.
Call the.
And what we could end up doing is doing a
Question, Mary?
doing a committee bill. We wouldn't have to necessarily do this bill. We could do a committee bill. Because if we continue working on H50 next January, it's still an action that would have to go back to the Senate. If we did an amendment, they would have to concur with our House proposal of amendment. If we started from scratch, then that bill starts from scratch.
Yeah, I would have chosen to accept their version right now, but I'm not gonna block what Mary's just put forth, Funding is okay.
So any further discussion? So all those in favor of Mary's motion to punt, to send it back here, please raise your hand. Okay, all those opposed? It's 11-zip. Okay, thank you, folks. We've come full circle. Those things happen. There was a little more time, maybe we could have worked it through. I'm gonna check with the speaker to make sure what the motions be, and we'll go from there.
I think
And Madam Chair, I just appreciate having this conversation. I'm here to work with you all. I think the space book is important for its purposes. And if we do need to, after presenting data, some type of different report, something, that's what we should really, what we should really work on. We should work on jointly. So I thank the committee for the time and the discussion.
And I want to also thank Ben for hunting, coming in. Really appreciate that.
Thank you.
Yeah,
That was a help.
I exist.
Let's go to lunch, folks. We hope there's still food left up there.